When I first heard that the new Assassin's Creed game would be set in classical Greece, part of my very soul ascended to an ethereal plane of a higher existence, and I saw the ghost of Thucydides himself shedding a single tear of joy. I'm only slightly exaggerating, but the fact is, your friendly neighborhood Blue was very excited. Fast forward to me playing this game, and it's everything I ever wanted and more. So today, I thought it would be fun for us all to take a look at this game to figure out how historically realistic it is. The short answer is very, but for the long answer, let's do some history. But before we jump in, huge thanks to Audible for sponsoring this video. Stick around to the end to find out how you can learn a whole lot more about ancient Greece for free with Audible. And while Ubisoft is not sponsoring this video, they are helping me give away one free copy of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is also very exciting, so stay tuned for that too. Alright, I've got to say right off that this game world is the best recreation of ancient Greece that you will find anywhere. The cities, the countryside, the buildings, the people, the ideas, it's all truly Greek. The best compliment I can give this game is that it makes you feel like Spider-Man. No, wait, wrong game, sorry. When you're playing this game, you are in a full, true recreation of ancient Greece. And the web swinging is fantastic. Damn it, wrong game. Okay, sorry. I could gush for hours about all the little details they had no need to include but did anyway. If you want to see me go slack-jawed in awe or giggle like a child at some parts of this game, I'd recommend checking out my Assassin's Creed Odyssey live streams, which I've linked in the description and I'm sure have been flooding your sub box for the past month. Sorry. For this video, I'll paint with broad strokes to show you what this game gets right and what it gets wrong. The first and perhaps most important accomplishment here is the world. While lots of distances are stretched and shrunk, you can see all of Greece represented here, and everything is in the right place. I like to describe it as true to the weight of the Greek world, if not the exact scale. So although Athens might dominate the Attica Peninsula, if you hop on a horse and head northeast, you'll run into the plains of Marathon. Then if you follow the road south along the coast, you'll round Cape Sunio, just like you would in real life. And the whole game is like this. The world is filled with recreations of real monuments and buildings. In addition to the Golden Age works you'd expect, such as the Parthenon and the Oracle's Temple at Delphi, you can also find sunken Minoan ruins and busted up Mycenaean palaces for famous Trojan war heroes like Odysseus and Ajax. They go out of their way to show you how layered the Greek world was even as far back as this. And the best part is that the game map itself has a database function where you can read all about the locations you're encountering just by hovering the cursor over it, which is a really clever way to integrate the often praised but clunky and less often used database from past games. And speaking of the map, a new mechanic they've added is the conquest system, where you can sabotage war efforts to tip the balance between Athens and Sparta and help territory change hands. While this is pretty much completely history-breaking, it's very clearly for the sake of gameplay, and I'm honestly glad they did it that way because it's just more fun to have a hand in the movements of the war. In real life, Athens owned the Aegean Sea and Sparta held onto the Greek mainland, and those borders didn't budge for 30 years. That's not the most interesting for a game, so I get it. And speaking of the Aegean Sea, let's talk about those new naval warfare mechanics. In addition to how pretty all of the ships look, I really appreciate the strong emphasis on ramming and boarding enemy ships. Triremes were indeed the maritime powerhouses of the day, and that accurately reflects the way that they did combat. I really think it's done quite well, but the fact is that triremes liked to sit high in the water with minimal drag to be as fast as possible. So when you also have 24 archers and spearmen atop your decks, those ships would have tipped over in a heartbeat. I appreciate that they give combat an extra dimension for the sake of gameplay, which is important in an interactive video game, but it's worth mentioning specifically where the game diverges from the reality. But there is another problem with the navies. That is, Sparta is shown as having one in this game, when the fact of the matter is they couldn't navigate a bathtub without drowning. They didn't have the money or the resources for it, they were terrible at building the ships, and they didn't have the population available to row them. The only reason Sparta won the war in the end was because they borrowed a navy from the Persians about 20 years after this game takes place. The reality in 431 BC was that the Aegean itself practically counted as a temple to Athena. There were so many Athenians running around it all the time. So rather than say this ad infinitum, I'm just gonna put a Spartan trireme on screen whenever something is happening for the sake of gameplay, because just like a Spartan trireme, it makes the game better, but it's entirely made up. Okay? Deal. This next topic involves a spoiler from the first 5 minutes of the game, so warning, I guess. But anyway, the game opens half a century ago with the Battle of Thermopylae, where you play as King Leonidas fighting the Persians. It's a really slick sequence that instantly gets you into the setting, and even though it's not directly addressed, they show the simultaneous Battle of Artemision between the Athenian and Persian navies, which is a really nice detail. And I was giddy to see Leonidas mowing down Persians with both points of his spear, because Greek spears were bladed on both ends, and no one seemed seems to realize that, but they had this in the game, so I really like that. The only problem here is that there's not a phalanx in sight, and that carries over to the conquest battles between Athens and Sparta that you can participate in across the game world. You can jump right into a massive brawl between hundreds of soldiers, but it's just that, a brawl. In reality, Athens wouldn't dare fight Sparta head-on, and they especially wouldn't abandon the entire concept of phalanx warfare just to, oh, fine, you're right, fair enough. I just feel like there's something they could have done to bridge the gap between full phalanx and battle royale, so I would have liked to see that. And speaking of battles, I was really impressed by the portrayal of how Athens was handling the fact that Sparta was camped right outside their walls, constantly besieging them. This was a big factor for most of the war. The Spartans were ravaging Athenian farms left and right, so it's fantastic to actually hear Pericles advocating for staying safe behind the walls while his counterpart Cleon and the others want to take the fight to Sparta. One side quest for the general Demosthenes has you stealthing around Spartan camps to take out their generals in a manner that's quintessentially Demosthenes, and I thought it was a really great way to merge gameplay, character, and world building. If you ask me, moments like this is where AC Odyssey really shines. The true-to-history personalities of the main players informing the accurate portrayal of strategic situations in the early phase of the war, experienced directly through gameplay, and all contained within a gorgeously accurate Greek setting. You've got it all, it's perfect. I don't want to spoil this next bit because it's honestly best that you see for yourself, but after arriving in Athens, you're treated to one of the most notorious parties in the Greek world, a symposium at the house of Pericles. From front to back, this entire sequence is a joy. You're able to chat with historical big shots like famous playwrights, squabbling sophists, my boy Socrates recreating a discussion pulled directly from the pages of Plato's Republic which almost brought a tear to my eye, and a guest appearance from everyone's favorite historical sweetheart, Alcibiades. My only complaint, and this is an honest complaint, is that Alcibiades is not hot enough. Honestly, he doesn't do it for me here. Really expected more chiseled features, but that's neither here nor there. So, the good thing is that in addition to his characterization as a complete sex fiend, he's constantly scheming when you see him, in true Alcibiades fashion. I love it. Also, conversations with the famously shoeless philosopher Socrates tease entire Platonic dialogues worth of philosophical discussion. Those two are standout characters since you spend so much time with them, but even still, for the most part, the portrayals of famous historical figures are true to who they were, even if they're not all super deep. In the case of Cleon, even though you don't really see him a whole lot, I loved how he was trying to beat Pericles through the merits of his strategies rather than any underhand tactics. And last but not least, the Spartan general Brasidas is the biggest badass on the face of the earth. It's not quite the same as having, Leonardo da Vinci from the Ezio days, but it's definitely a step up from Caesar and Cleopatra from AC Origins, and I'm grateful for that. And speaking of characters, arguably the two biggest characters in the game are the cities Athens and Sparta themselves. Athens is this huge naval superpower that sprawls across the Aegean, and Sparta is this hulking behemoth with its claws dug into the Greek mainland. We know they're at war, but the game doesn't really ever say why, which is disappointing. Full disclosure, despite playing for several hours over 2 straight weeks, I haven't reached the late game yet, so this is a really big game and things may change as I go along, but at roughly the mid-game, I still sadly don't get a sense of what distinguishes these two. Since Sparta magically has a navy and Athens can magically hold its own in all of these open land battles, both of which are historically untenable by the way, you really don't get a sense of why this war lasted so long. In real life, Athens' insatiable imperialism provoked the conflict, and then both sides wanted to string the other out. Sparta wanted to starve Athens, but the naval supply chain and Pericles' defensive strategy stopped that from happening. Meanwhile, Athens hoped that Sparta would eventually give up and go home rather than try to take all of Athens' holdings in the Aegean through outright conquest. They both thought that if they just waited long enough, the war would end in their favor. The plot more or less blames the length of the war on this mysterious cult operating in the shadows, which I feel cheapens the narrative all around. And the sad thing is that the themes at play here in the history are perfect for an Assassin's Creed game. The whole idea is freedom versus order and chaos versus oppression. In the history, neither Athens or Sparta is really the good guy. Athens extended democratic rights to all of its allies, but it did so through extortion and outright oppression. While freedom of speech was a staple of Athenian society, most women were cooped up on the second floor of the house. By contrast, Spartan women had much more autonomy, and Sparta's allies were much freer, but at the same time, their kings ran an oligarchic government, and Sparta enslaved an entire population called the Helots to power their economy. The themes of Assassin's Creed are practically bursting from the pages of the history books, so I feel like I shouldn't need to dig that hard or wait till the end to find these themes at play in the story. I was over 30 hours in before I heard one character describe Athens as an empire, and it was a really good scene too, so I just want more of that. I'm holding out hope for more of those themes when I get to Sparta, and if the rest of the game proves me wrong, I'll gladly add a card in the top right corner of the screen saying so. Okay, enough geopolitics. Let's talk about something less inflammatory and nitpicky, like the fact that you can play as a woman in this game. Now, as the playable character, it's perfectly natural that we can tank dozens of stab wounds, fall the entire height of the Acropolis without a scratch, and fight a literal Medusa, but having boobs is just too darn unrealistic, right? Look, I get it. Women had very few rights in ancient Greece, so when we're talking realism, the idea of a woman having the opportunity to go out and do the stuff Cassandra does seems like maybe kind of a stretch. But honestly, between the warlike nature of the definitely female Athena, numerous accounts of predominantly female huntress clans dedicated to Artemis, and the entire history of the Amazonian women, it wasn't unheard of for badass sword-swinging warriors to also be ladies. So it's silly to act like it's impossible within the context of the game. Unusual? Sure, but unrealistic? Nah. Okay, for real this time, moving on. One detail that they did a really great job with was the voice acting. Almost all of the characters, including the protagonists, are voiced by Greek actors, and it's great to hear authentic Greek pronunciations of words and names to give some extra flavor to the world. I wish we had full Greek audio localization for maximum immersion, but I understand why the financials of that one didn't work out. Still, it would have been very easy to make everyone BBC British again, but I really appreciate them going the extra mile here. It's great to hear Pericles talk in the Agora about that pesky Spartan Polemarchos. And while we're talking about stuff that this game does really well, I'd like to gush about the presentation of cities in this game. The Greek world was built on the polis system, so it's cool to see how different cities come through. Athens, of course, is drenched in marble and splendor despite actively being under siege. It's also really nice to see the distinction between fabulous public works, the houses of the super wealthy, the districts of the pottery and sculpture artisans who make all that stuff happen in the first place, and the flooded neighborhoods of the Athenian poor. Megara, by contrast, is completely run down, since it was a flashpoint of conflict on the peninsula between Attica and the Peloponnese, and it's an overgrown wreck in there. Really well done. Corinth, by contrast again, is lush and absolutely stunning, while being corrupt to the core. The whole city is practically an offering to their patron goddess Aphrodite. Argos is a very old city that's been built up over the course of centuries, so it's surrounded by Mycenaean ruins on every front. And Sparta is, well, kinda small, especially considering how important it was. Spartans are famously short with their words and stubborn with their architecture. The different areas of the game world are exploding with personality, and the art design reflects the different local approaches to that Greek style. Richer areas have marble temples and flowing silk banners, whereas poorer areas are just built out of wood, and in some places the roof tiles are flaking off. The Odyssey team did a damn good job of making it all look beautiful and unique while keeping it accurate. That's not easy. The last big thing I want to talk about is mercenaries. In the game, Greece is filled with mercenaries looking to work for any side that will pay them, and that's your character's motivation for flip-flopping between Athens and Sparta at the whim of the player. They'll both pay you. And it's a little bit of a lame cop-out, but it's also... Alright, the boat has a point. In Greek history, mercenaries were hired out from various parts of Greece as complete groups, and we have loads of documentation about mercenary bands of Rhodian slingers or Cretan archers in wartime, but it's unlikely that a standing army would let some rando walk up and fight in a battle. So be aware that the mercenary system for both the player and the NPCs you run into is pretty much pulled from thin air. Also, the Spartan kick is a completely ineffective combat technique in real life, and your character really should have a shield if they're going to— Oh, I know, I just wanted to say it, okay? All told, those are the key takeaways here. The war, the combat, the battles, the geopolitics are all tweaked for the player at the expense of realism, but that's why this is a game and not a movie, and a fun game at that. There are other areas that the Odyssey team had much more freedom to tackle accurately without having to compromise for the requirements of gameplay or the narrative. And in every single one of those aspects, they absolutely nailed it. The world, the locations, the characters, the architecture, the landscapes, the seascapes, all are breathtaking, and all are lifted right from history and placed squarely in the palm of every single player. I'll say it again. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is ancient Greece. And speaking of Odysseys, I've got the scoop on an easy and entertaining way to learn all about ancient Greece, and it's thanks to our partners at Audible who are sponsoring the channel today. With an astonishingly huge catalog of audiobooks to choose from, Audible is the place to go for all your literary needs. For me, working on this channel involves a lot of reading, and if you're in college, I can imagine you're doing the same, so I love being able to fire up an audiobook while I'm commuting to and from the library, or just have it playing in the background while I'm making some breakfast. It's also really great for vacations, as I learned this past summer. And for those of you who listen to me on double speed because I don't talk quite as fast as Red does, and I'm sorry about that, you'll be glad to know that you can speed up or slow down the narration to fit your perfect pace. Audible members get a credit for any audiobook completely free every month, as well as additional discounts in the store. To get you started, Audible is offering all of you a 30-day free trial and that free audiobook if you sign up with our link on audible.com/overlysarcastic or text overly sarcastic to 500 500. Since we're on the topic of ancient Greece, I was going to keep it on brand and recommend this audiobook of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, but then I found out that you can listen to Sir Ian McKellen himself narrate the Odyssey, and I'm morally obligated to recommend that to you. Not only is it a really good translation of the book, but also it's Ian McKellen, guys, come on! So head over to audible.com/overly sarcastic to have Gandalf himself tell you all about the world's worst navigator for free, or text overly sarcastic to 500 500. Now you see, the trick is that you listen to this while you spend hours upon hours playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and then you got maximal immersion going on. That's really what you want. And speaking of, well, video games, huge thanks to Ubisoft for helping me do a giveaway today. If you're one of our wonderful patrons, and it's never too late to join, simply leave a comment on the Patreon post for this very video, which I've linked below, and I'll be picking a winner at random next week. Best of luck.